Mira Business FM. The sound of success.
This is Mira Business FM. It's the morning drive. Welcome to the program. You can contact us, info@mira.fm or whatsapp.mira.fm, or if you prefer a number, 971 522 789 567. There's a rhythm in there somewhere. Depends how you are with numbers, but you're very welcome. Don't forget podcasts. Everything we do is podcast, and you can find it whichever platform you use. And a thumbs up or an emoji or a subscription is very much appreciated. Now on the program, markets and the key considerations businesses need to evaluate when they explore opportunities in either post-conflict or higher risk markets. Specifically, today, some general insights into the Syrian market. Now, aspects such as political and economic conditions, sanctions considerations, the business environment, regulatory frameworks, sector opportunities, the workforce landscape, etc. Key risk factors, and all from a professional risk assessment point of view. It's a huge topic. We've got about 20 minutes. Hopefully that's some time. Scott Wilcox is the founder of Sicuro Group. They're a leading provider of risk advisory and security services for organizations operating in complex environments. Scott, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
You're very welcome. I need to kind of set the scene, I suppose, to start with. So kind of a long, fairly wordy question. I hope you'll bear with me. The questions will get shorter and easier to understand, I promise. But to begin with, we've seen huge development in Syria in the last 12 months. Parliamentary elections held under the authority of the transitional government just in October there. It's a country rich in natural resources, mineral resources, oil, gas, rock salt, etc. In the past week, we've just seen the first major international oil and gas conference in Damascus since the events of a year ago. So, unsurprisingly, a whole host of agreements signed in the energy sector in recent times, and from a whole host of major international players as well. Speed of change has been, well, let's say, impressive. Just to start with, just your kind of overall thoughts, how would you sum up the developments we've seen in, just 12 months? It's a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's encouraging. The lessons that have been learned from interventions and post-conflict reform over many years now, over a decade, I think what's been seen to not work and prolong the economic recovery and stability of these countries has some way shaped what we're seeing in Syria today is let's try something different and see if it works this time.
Yeah, for sure. What are the foundational risk indicators businesses should evaluate before they consider entering Syria as a market?
So first and foremost, you reeled off many of the considerations, but the macro indicators are things like who is paying us, okay?
Right.
And how we're going to be paid, and what are we doing? Is it legal? If you can answer those three things that are we'll say mutually exclusive, but those are the three that you must be able to answer and feel comfortable with before you move down to the next layers. So again, if I'm working for an international organization like the United Nations, or I'm being funded by the World Bank to do something aligned with infrastructure rehabilitation or reconstruction of a port, a power facility, or something, that's quite different to I'm incorporated here in the UAE and I've got a local private counterparty in Syria who's looking to build a crypto exchange or a way of transferring money cross-border that does solve a problem, okay, but will be right on the high side of risk against sanctions for the individual and for the companies and all involved. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Yeah. But let's look at operational perspectives, business perspectives that I guess are easier to understand. But what do companies need to consider when it comes to, you're sitting and you're assessing the current level of political stability, the current level of economic stability. Where do you start when it comes to that?
Yeah, sure. So we're in this beautiful city where we have a great indicator, and that is our airlines, our airlines flying. There is emerging, Fly Dubai, and then we see that there is a more established trade stability and perception between the two countries of when the likes of Emirates or Etihad step in. And other regional players, the Gulf carriers, they are a really good indicator of the stability. Safety is the number one concern for them if they believe that the air space is safe and that the ground handling on the other end. And what I mean by that is the engineering ability or capability there as well to get equipment in to be able to support these magnificent and expensive machines is there. That's not a bad start, but first and foremost, are our airlines operating? What are the flights or the transit routes in and out? The borders opening? Are they closing regularly? And what triggers those closures? What is the power and communications infrastructure like in country? Are we down to 1 and 2 hours per day, or are we up at around 12? What hotels are operating? Do we have international chains like Sheraton or these bigger name brands, or are we down still in local managed facilities? Of course, we want to look at whether or not our insurer will cover us. So that's a really important one early to bring in, and what they will cover, to what extent, for either a shelter in place or some form of controlled move out of country for medical or geopolitical upheaval. Those are really the big things. Is there an airline? Is there comms? Is there a hotel? Is there a medical facility? Does my insurance cover me going in and out? And you'll find that then you'll ask bigger questions, okay? What's the road safety like? How can I move around country? Am I going to be confined to, in this case, Damascus? Or am I able to push out to other cities like Aleppo, Homs, Latakia, Tartus? What's the trafficability like there? And again, asking the same questions once I get to that other location. You'll also see that right now, the posture of the checkpoints, they're quite thorough in what they're looking for. There is still the movement of contraband that is a concern. See vehicles or visitors perhaps delayed for a short amount of time until they establish who you are and where you're going and the nature of your visit. So these are things that you have to be comfortable with and send the right people with the right profile so that they can focus on what they're going to be doing once they get into country.
It's a much improved picture that you're painting. That what I'm getting from you is a much more positive picture, and it's also I'm so pleased because I felt, before I started talking to you, I felt I was a little bit out of my comfort zone here. This is not my wheelhouse, but I understand an airline flying in that's a good sign. It's so interesting that it is so. I don't mean to use the phrase back to basics, but it kind of is those very basic principles, I guess. What would an organisation need to understand about the business environment? Let's take that as the next kind of stage, particularly around compliance and due diligence. What do organisations need to be thinking about?
Yeah, that's something that's overlooked to a large degree, and I find that's it's not exclusively a regional nuance, but I would say that it's a pain point. That KYC isn't done particularly well. There is always a degree of nepotism that's used, and that the relationships that are built between some of the Arab nations, if you like, and the way that they do business. Now, when you've got the layer of complexity of the sanctions over the top, the risk that gives, or the risk that presents, is really important to understand and contextualize. There will be people that thinking, well, I'm not British, American, or a European Union citizen. My company is not incorporated in either of those jurisdictions, so therefore I am immune to the Caesar Act or the blanket EU sanctions, and that's not the case. If you're transacting in euros or dollars, or those currencies are being used by your intermediary bank in the transaction.
So anywhere along the chain.
Yeah. And
okay.
it's really important to understand your business, like I say, and contextualizing that so that you understand who is in the chain, the counterparty, and the exposure that they give you to the rules, if you like, beyond what is legal in the jurisdiction of your incorporation, if that's here, and what you're doing in Syria. Now, Syria is a land of reform right now.
Sure.
We have to understand that it has been shut out not just because of the sanctions, but they've missed big shifts. Digitalization happened over the last 10, 12 years. And so much lives on paper. Many of the records have been destroyed. And so doing meaningful KYC is not something that you could do to the same degree and get so far as if you were doing it in the GCC or someone from a more, should we say, digitally mature jurisdiction. Yeah. There are checks that you could do on my name or yours through the internet that would give a general flavor, all those red flags, and there are registries and things that a name might appear in. That's just not the case in Syria. Yeah. And so doing it well to ensure that you really are doing business with the right parties that aren't going to give you a headache further down the line is really important. And it's something you can't rush. There is definitely a FOMO in this market, and I understand why. Incremental gains of market share in a mature market like the UAE or Saudi doesn't excite shareholders in London or New York.
It's not exactly the next thing. No, I
right.
know what you mean.
But when a new economy, a totally new economy is opening up and emerging, there's this rush to get in.
Sure.
There are a huge young population, blah, 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 that are going to have all of these needs and wants. So let's get in there. But the right thing to do is to pause and be deliberate and go in step by step.
It's the way it should always be, I guess, and all too often it's not. The digitalization aspect is so interesting. It's not something I'd thought about, but everything has gone online. Everything's gone online since COVID. The courts here turned around almost immediately and became wholly digital. Not so much a question, more of a point, really, but I'm interested in your thoughts. It's really, really important to reiterate how important it is for companies to understand local knowledge, the legal regulatory landscape. You've just pointed out lots of that. Before you initiate any form of engagement, things like political legal stability, regulatory compliance, taxation, labor laws, market entry barriers, IP protection. There's an awful lot to think about. Capital controls, currency controls, for example. Yeah. There's also, isn't there, cultural and kind of social norms that you need to consider. All of this comes into play, I guess. I'm just interested in what how you would consider, if you can, all of those things.
Yeah, as I said, there's a lot of reform happening in Syria. The legacy of doing business there is, again, it's pre-digitalization and it's pre-many of the efficiencies that we now utilize with tech. Globalization is yet to hit Syria. That's kind of the message, and they want it. They're welcoming of it. You saw Shara, the president, last week, giving a very, I think, pragmatic but with a lot of upside, if you like, at the Doha Forum last week in his speech, and it was good. It was compelling. And when we're looking at what market entry looks like and the opportunities that are there. My company ran a podcast just a few weeks ago, or a webinar, and we had a lawyer and an established businessman. The lawyer used to work for the UN, but now he's overwhelmed with company formations, for businesses seeking licenses. And he's saying, look, this is what you must consider, You must be patient. Everyone's running as fast as they can, but you're in a line. And we're trying to inject a rule of law so that there is a process that everyone respects so that everyone can get in here in time. If we start creating all of this fast tracking and nepotism and so on and so forth, we're going to lose control. And then very quickly, we're going to be seen as a joke of a jurisdiction. So please allow us to find our way together as we emerge from the cold and come in, and we'll learn your practices and processes, but have respect for our culture and the fact that we are doing our best. Understand, internally, we have 7 million internally displaced people. 6 million people or more are believed to have emigrated from the country elsewhere. And that was a huge brain drain of doctors, engineers, scientists, accountants, all of those people left. So what you've got is a young, hungry for skills workforce, but they do need leadership, and they need training, and they need time, like I say, to understand, to build up that experience.
Well,
Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but those are the bits that stuck out immediately.
No, it's so interesting, and I didn't really ask you a question. It's just those are really kind of thoughts that occur to me, because there is so much to think about. I was going to ask you about the workforce, the kind of workforce landscape in Syria, really, availabilities and skill levels, and recruitment considerations. I mean, you kind of pointed briefly to that there. There's a whole host of stuff to think about there as well.
There really is. So as I said there was a huge brain drain. People wanted to export what they had, which was their human capital, to be able to repatriate money back to support those that either didn't want to or couldn't, for whatever reason, travel and leave. And so that was, if you look at it through those optics or that aperture, it was a responsible thing to do. But attracting them back now, when there isn't yet the infrastructure or the opportunity, is very, very tough. And what that's also done, it means that what is available in terms of human capital is very expensive and in high demand. So doctors, good accountants and lawyers and so on. And what we're seeing, even though it's very nascent, is a further divide of those who are capable and have figured out, because they did business during this time, they incorporated here or in Amman or maybe in Beirut, so they've got the ability to transact, and they're seen as clean, they're regulated outside of the Syrian jurisdiction. Those with, like I said, this FOMO are running to them to get a soft landing and go into country. I get it, but that doesn't help the long term. Okay, so there is a bit of a juxtaposition, for want of better words, of how that will compound and how that will play out. I'd say the smart and playing the long game is looking to put in a small expatriate management team, but with the full intent of training and developing, so that you can build a competent workforce to support your endeavor or your operation as quick as possible. That's where you're going to get your biggest long-term win. And I think that companies that are looking for the long term will do this. And things like port operations or any long-term endeavor, it just isn't economically viable to have a migrant workforce come in and do that. Only during your initial investment and stand up of operation, you've got to transition to a local workforce. And the sooner that you do that, the better. And if I add to that, by the way, it can take 1 to 2 months to process a work visa and permit for not a non-skilled worker, but a non-executive, okay? So someone who isn't on the business license or close to that executive leadership, and there will be further scrutiny. Don't forget, Syria has like many countries in the region of Middle East, North Africa, it's 25% unemployment. And one of the key or the macro indicators to stability is getting these people back into work and getting that economic stability. Economic stability, political and security stability, they go hand in hand. So we need to give these people the means to support themselves. So again, with my humanitarian hat on or common sense hat, you must use locals wherever you can as early as you can.
Let me ask you a slightly more sensitive question in a way, but if you're an organization looking at Syria is the example in this case, how do you typically evaluate the security environments, those in the process, you're rebuilding infrastructure? What general kind of categories of risk do you assess?
Yeah, so in terms of general category of risk, the first one is physical security and safety to the individual, okay? So if I can't demonstrate or enable my client to demonstrate to their people that we have understood, we've contextualized, and we've reduced risk to what is an acceptable level to travel, then they won't or they shouldn't, okay? So that starts at, again, the airlines. Is there a safe, credible airline going in and out? Do they have a haven to stay? Is there medical support? I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself a little here, but it's all the way down to our biggest concern always. I mean, you know, we're often presented with the question or the situation of where clients might be expecting us to have this big armed bubble of security around them.
Right.
And we're very much of a pragmatic nature of, well, if we need that, then maybe it's not the right time to go just now, okay, for you. What we want
That's
to do...
your common sense hat on
It is,
again,
yeah.
isn't it?
It's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And matching the environment that's there. So the biggest risk right now is the roads to an individual traveller.
Okay.
The serviceability of these cars, because of sanctions, has meant that they may not be maintained so well. So it's really important, and that's one of the parts that we de-risk, is to have good vehicles, trained English-speaking drivers so that you can communicate. Redundancy in your communication when you're on the road. The ability to self-recover with a spare wheel or a trolley jack, or to tow one vehicle. And of course, a first aid kit and some water and some warm clothing, because Syrian winters get cold and there is no help coming. So the ability to be self-sustained, all of these parts roll into the physical safety and security. Then we're looking at governance, okay?
Yeah, sure.
And rule of law. What is there that protects us from commercially in what we're doing, in the installation that it gives us? Financial and compliance risk, okay? Is this going to come and bite us further down the line? And then really our exit. Can you get your people and your money and your assets out, if needed to, within 48 hours? That is the litmus test. And then understanding again and contextualizing, okay, so what can we get out, and really putting a number against those risks and measuring up whether or not, it doesn't have to be Syria, I talk Syria, but it's any of these locations that are emerging, frontier, post-conflict, that present really the same, there are nuances of course, but there are playbook questions that you have to get across. And one real key thing that I urge is that companies involve their security and their risk practitioners early. These decisions shouldn't be made in a vacuum. They need to be approached with a degree of common sense and contextualized about where you already do business. If you're already doing business in countries like Nigeria, okay, where there are myriad risks and it's a very mature market, pound to a pinch, you can do good business in Syria, okay?
Do you know, Scott, it's been fascinating talking to you. I feel a little bit less out of my comfort zone now. I'm with you on the airlines thing, and you didn't repeat yourself at all. Scott Wilcox is the founder of Sicuro Group, provider of risk advisory and security services for organisations. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks again.
Appreciate it. This is Mira Business FM.
Mira Business FM.